Hi there, this is Helen Tarrant again from Uplift. Here with our whole team. Wow, it's massive. Welcome to another episode of Commercial Property Roadshow here with Helen Tarrant, and today I'm actually going to talk about uplift property, pitfalls and mistakes, right? Because what I've been finding out there is that, look, everyone talks about the uplift, or we talk about things with upsides, but one of the things that gets mistaken is what happens when you make a mistake with uplift. And very few people, when they get into commercial property, they come from the residential space and they really actually don't know how to get started in the commercial space in terms of uplift. It's very counterintuitive to residential, and you almost have to unlearn some of the things you know in residential to be really successful in the commercial property uplift, right? So let's get started. I want to share with you some of the 3 major pitfalls that people have in commercial uplift, or that they come across, or that they actually miss when they're actually doing their developments or their retenancy or their refurbishments, right? So the number one big thing is capital costs. Then most of the time when you're doing the research or the negotiations for the uplift project, you have one buy take all negotiation. So you don't rarely go back to say, hey, you know what, the roof is an issue, or that there's a structural issue, or there's things that are not going to be solved. I've just done pest and building report, and now that's not going to be so good, so I want a reduction in price. Well, the whole point of uplift projects is you'd actually take the property as is, right? So by taking it as is, what happens is that you don't get a second chance to bite at the cherry, right? Most of the time, unless it's a major structural issue, unless the property is actually going to be falling over, you actually don't get a second bite of the cherry. So when you negotiate, most of the time people don't work out what the actual costs of the capital works, and they miss it, right? So they might miss some structural works, they might miss some structural issues, that all becomes all too much for them. So that means that later on, they're actually faced with more capital costs than they think, and that actually throws out their uplift, right? So they actually, instead of making a 20% margin or 30% margin, they actually make 10% less, because the capital works do throw that out. So that's one of the things you actually want to be careful of, right? So that's the number one thing. Now, how do you go about that and avoiding that pitfall is, firstly, you look at structural issues. So presumably you're coming from a pest and building point of view, and you have some experience. If you don't, you really do need education and mentorship before you launch into a commercial property uplift project. So you look at, what are some of the major things that are cosmetic? What are some of the major things that's going to cost you in terms of renos, capital work? So your roof, your air conditioning, your lift, compliance, stairs, all of those things. Try to get an understanding. You won't know all of it, but try to get an understanding of what that's going to cost you, and how much of it you need to fix to get a tenant in, and how much of it you need to fix for good to later on sell it, right? Because sometimes you just need to fix it to a good enough point, not totally replace it, right? So define those costs. And you need to define those costs relatively quickly in the beginning, so that you actually have, you get a starting point, right? Because there'll be other people who can do this better than you, and they'll be able to nab a good deal, right? They know a good deal when they see it, right? So that's the most important thing. Now, number 2 thing is the possible rent. And heaps of people get this wrong. Heaps of people, and that ruins the uplift deal. What I mean by possible rents is that the agent will tell you that it's going to be $300 a square meter, right? And you realize afterwards you can only rent it out for $150 or $200 a square meter. The agent thinks it's an upside if you buy a vacant property and you engineer it, and all of a sudden you get like 6% yield or 7% yield, but you're like, well, I could just buy a property at 0.5% yield less. So what's the point of me doing it and going through and taking on the risk, right? So got to take that grain of salt and really understand your research, and that's part of your DD process. And I see people stuff this up all the time, because all they do is talk to agents, and one agent to the next agent to the people afterwards, give them false information, right? That's where you really need experts who understand on the ground and give you unbiased information. That's one of the advantages our students get. through our mentorship program and through us actually taking them hand by hand through the uplift process, we actually do independent research. And because we also transact deals in the area, we know what kind of tenants they can get, and we know the kind of rent per square meter they're likely to achieve, which is really, really important as well. And number 3, the likely return of yields on the other side. Now, people get this wrong all the time because the agent goes, oh, I reckon you could get, 5%. If the property's done up really well with this kind of tenant. But they're talking, you might get an A grade tenant and you have to spend $100,000 or $150,000 more than you want to or have to be able to get the uplift. But what if you just get a functional tenant, and what is the yield then, right? You have to look at the different tenancies and the different yield that it spits out in relation to the sale price and whether that creates enough of a margin for you or not in the future, right? And some people it won't, and for some people it will, and you got to make that and do that independent research. The agent's going to tell you a lot of stuff, and when you talk to a lot of people, they're going to tell you a lot of stuff, but not all of them are going to be correct. So, and that's where most people stuff up, is when they get to the other side, they're literally not making any money because the sale price is wrong. And they miscalculated the sale price, they miscalculated the capital works, and they've miscalculated the rent that they can get, right? So what you got to do is partner up with someone who actually knows the area, or have a really reliable agent to know the area, or go there and site the property and have a walk around and talk to the locals and really understand it. Or you got to go with a company like us, Unicorn Commercial Property, who can help you, who does this thing day in, day out, and know what to look for. Now, one of the things that we always do with uplift properties, and I can't stress this enough, is to do a site inspection. You can buy, set and forget without it, but you need a site inspection of uplift properties, and we site specifically, our team who has a building background, go and site a uplift property all the time, every time we do it, because then we can put a plan in place for our clients, and then we know what we're dealing with, and we can estimate the cost so much better and so much easier for them in the future, and we can put a plan in place and execute that plan and know with 80% certainty what they're going to get on the other side, and then put contingency plans in place as well. So with that in mind, these are the 3 things to look out for. Capital works, right? Capital works. Your rent per square meter and the likely type of tenant you are going to get or can get. And then, of course, that flows on to number 3, the likely sale price or yield you are going to get on the other end. So your lease terms and your yields all correlate, right? There's multiple levers to pull. And sometimes, and most of the time, an uplift project is 12 months, right? In that time, there's lots of pitfalls and earthquakes that can happen, right? The tenant could back out, in the negotiations, it'll be costing a lot in advertising, materials go up, shortage of labor, lots and lots of things can happen. But really, ultimately, you got to make the decision if you're going to go down this path or you're not going to go down this path. And ultimately, what you need to also decide is, if you're going down this pathway, who is going to be in your corner helping you, making sure you don't make those mistakes. Because make a mistake on any of those 3 major points, what you end up with is that you end up paying a lot more for the property, so you're not making a margin, so you can't do the flip. You'll have to hold the property till the market changes, or you kind of have to sell it to break even, which is not the purpose of doing an uplift in commercial property. So you want to talk more about it? You want someone to help you? You want to help someone to map out a plan and teach you what to do, and most importantly, what not to do in a commercial property uplift or development? Reach out to us, helentarrant.com, Unicorn Commercial Property, and let us partner with you and help you and deliver with you a successful uplift commercial property project.